this panel I'm particularly excited about because I think women's health is the best kept secret in what is new and exciting and innovation. It's the best kept secret. And a lot of it has to do with history. Women were not required to be in clinical trials till what year? 19. Woohoo! I like this crowd already. Till 1993, so there's a big data gap. And even basic science. Most of us were taught that men have XY, women have XX chromosomes. But what did we all learn about that second X that women have? It was called the silent X. Because it was just assumed that that was a silent X chromosome, and now we know, yeah, that's definitely not the case either. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in women's health that may help us to start to understand why there are so many areas where women are differently and disproportionately impacted. So for the purposes of today's discussion, women's health will be defined as areas where women are differently, disproportionately, or exclusively impacted. And so this includes autoimmune disease. What percent of autoimmune patients in the U.S. are women? 80. Mm-hmm. Yes, 75, 80%. Depends on which condition, but yes, somewhere around 80% are women. What about what percentage of Alzheimer's patients are women? Yeah. Exactly, 75. 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women. And when it comes to heart disease, women are 50% more likely to die in the year after a heart attack than men. Heart disease is still the leading killer of women. So there are a lot of things about this category of women's health that are much broader and bigger than we usually think. And so from an investment standpoint, it's really exciting and really interesting and really new. A lot of these breakthroughs are really new. So that's the background for today. We'll start with some introductions. I'll kick off. I'm Jessica Federer. I am an investor and board member. I sit on the board of Sage Therapeutics, a brain health company that just launched the new postpartum depression drug. I sit on the board of a tech company that was founded by a Yale founder, Pluto Health. It's the back engine for Walgreens and Walmart and a bunch of clinical trial tech. Some other private boards, a private board out of Switzerland, which is replacing the tenaculum in the use of IUDs. So right now, if you have an IUD inserted, the tool used to stabilize your cervix is a tool called the tenaculum. And this is a tool that was developed to take bullets out of soldiers on the battlefield. And that is what is being used today, museum quality care for women in the US, when there are approved alternatives available. So my background is a lot in the women's health space. Before that, I was the chief digital officer at Bayer. I ran digital for the global pharma, consumer care, crop science, and animal health businesses. I'm a big data nerd. And actually, that big data nerd is thanks to my time at Yale, where I worked at CORE and was part of research here on the first hospital efficiency measure, the 30-day all-cause heart failure readmission rate. Woohoo! So that's my background. I am really pleased to have a panel here today that represents billion-dollar investors from the private sector, from the public sector, from the UK government, taxpayer dollars, from industry, one of the top women's health pharmaceutical companies, and a startup, a founder from a startup that is in the women's health space, living out the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Heather, would you start?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Bowerman, and I'm the founder of Dot Lab. And by background, I started my career in bioengineering and then early stage investing, and then was in the Boston office of McKinsey & Company working with healthcare and technology clients, and then was in the Obama administration doing science and technology policy. So it's a great time to have this panel where a lot of what we were working on over a decade ago in the administration, like ARPA-H and other efforts, are finally coming to fruition today. And I subsequently joined an early stage healthcare and machine learning company out of San Francisco. And I've been an operator at the intersection of healthcare and machine learning for the last decade. Dot Lab is my third company, and I spun this one out of the Yale School of Medicine. So we are one of the largest women's health spinouts from Yale. And I think what's really important in this conversation is delineating between healthcare services and the research and development gaps as we think about the funding landscape. And so, I appreciate that this panel is aptly named as, funding and not venture capital focused. I started Dot Lab with NIH funding and subsequently took checks from high net worth individuals and corporates, but not a single dollar of traditional venture capital went into our research and development efforts. So we have run the largest clinical study for endometriosis diagnostics in history based on intellectual property that I worked with the technology transfer office here to spin out. So the average life cycle for developing a diagnostic test, some of you may know, without a predicate is about 10 years. And we're 7 years into this effort, and we're really excited to roll it out to patients. So our clients are currently pharma. So anyway, thanks everybody for attending this panel.
Thank you, Heather. Sajni?
Great to meet everyone. My name is Sajni Chotai. I'm from British Patient Capital. And British Patient Capital is a subsidiary of the British Business Bank. So essentially that's the development bank in the UK, or the sovereign fund in the UK. And we invest directly into companies, and we also invest into venture and growth funds. And I sit in the life sciences funds team, and so I invest in life sciences companies and life sciences funds. And we are making a lot of investments into women's health indirectly through our funds, but also directly through companies. Prior to my time at BPC, I spent many years in digital health in startups and scale-ups, heading corporate development. And so that involved bringing companies over to the US from the UK. It involved M&A. It involved helping companies become IPO ready. And it also involved helping companies get fundraising, and so moving companies through the different series, fundraising for Series A to Series C. And prior to my role in startups, I was an investment banker, so I spent some time at Wall Street and also in London at different investment banks, helping healthcare and technology companies with their M&A, IPOs, and all kind of corporate-related matters. And my academic background is biochemical engineering, so that's why I focus on the life sciences. I did my undergraduate and my postgraduate at University College London in the UK. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Sajni. Beth?
Amazing, both of you. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Garner. I'm currently the Chief Scientific Officer for Ferring Pharmaceuticals, which is a mid-sized pharmaceutical company headquartered in Switzerland, but with a very big footprint in the U.S. We're mainly known for our IVF products. So anyone who's had IVF, probably a 70% chance that you've touched at least one of our drugs. But we're also in a number of other therapeutic areas as well. I am a GYN oncologist, an OBGYN and GYN oncologist by training. I trained at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Mass General and the Dana-Farber. I left clinical medicine 17 years ago and have been in the industry ever since then. I've worked for 6 different companies along that road, so it's just been amazing. Mostly therapeutics, a little bit of diagnostics in the ovarian cancer space, but really I would say I'm a drug developer by nature. I am on some boards. We won't go into the details there, but I certainly do board work. I've been very fortunate there. I'm also the immediate past president of the American Medical Women's Association, which is a very important organization for women doctors. I am an avid advocate for women's health. And I would say that, we're going to talk about this, but things have changed so much. I think back to even 5 years ago, I wrote an article and it was called Cri de Coeur. So those of you who know French know it's all about crying and the heart crying. And I was so upset about, the lack of investment in women's health and the lack of advancement. And so sitting here today, it's just super exciting. And then lastly, I just became a grandma.
Your most important new title.
Most important. 6 days ago. And I now have a beautiful granddaughter, so you can imagine how I'm feeling about that. Yes. And really hoping, right, that in the next few years, she's going to have a better life than we have in terms of addressing our unmet needs. So great to be here. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Erin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Lambrosa. I work at a private equity firm called L. Catterton. L. Catterton is the world's largest consumer-focused private equity firm. We manage around $35 billion across a number of strategies ranging from later stage private equity to earlier stage growth equity and some impact investing. And where I sit specifically is underneath the broader growth fund umbrella. I was brought on a couple of years ago to help build out an earlier stage strategy exclusively focused on writing sub $10 million checks into earlier stage health and wellness businesses, where there is a clear impact on the end patient, i.e. consumer, because that is sort of where we can, as a firm, add value. But the idea being, let's obviously create a great portfolio of earlier stage health and wellness businesses and sort of inject some incremental excitement and funding into the space, but also set ourselves up to be long-term partners to a number of these businesses and be able to continue contributing capital as they continue to grow. Prior to joining L. Catterton, I spent the bulk of my career at another large alternative asset manager called Blackstone. I was on the private equity team there for a handful of years, also was on the growth equity team, so have really dabbled in a bunch of different sort of stages of the private equity, investing world. And prior to that, I was also an investment banker at JP Morgan, where I was in the M&A group, focused not entirely, but almost exclusively on healthcare. And I would say my passion for focusing my efforts now on health and wellness and women's health in particular come from not just my own lived experiences and that of my mother and my grandparents, et cetera, but it's twofold. So one, on the broader health and wellness side, when I was a child, my dad invented a medical device. He got it patented, was super excited about it, and was never able to bring it to anything commercial because he didn't have sort of the business advice or expertise or guidance to really get him there. So when I was younger, I knew I had a passion in a lot of ways for science, but also wanted to figure out how I could help people with those scientific ideas and aspirations, bring them to the commercial market. And then more specifically on the women's health side, both of my grandmothers, one passed away from Alzheimer's. My current grandmother has dementia of some undiagnosed variety, and my great grandmother passed of Alzheimer's as well. So to the point that you made, Jessica, it's a disease that mainly impacts women for some reason or another, and for whatever reason, we don't know why. And that really is frustrating and makes me want to not just obviously figure out what's happening there, but contribute dollars and excitement and into the broader women's health space.
Thank you, Erin. Savannah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Savannah Leonard. I'm a consultant with McKinsey & Company and a fellow with the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation. At McKinsey, I lead a lot of our women's health work, particularly with the McKinsey Health Institute. The McKinsey Health Institute is a mission-driven entity at McKinsey where we're focused on answering the question, how can we add years to life and life to years? So within that question, we really like to focus on topics of health equity and in particular women's health, where we spent the last couple of years doing a ton of research to really identify what is the women's health gap and the economic opportunity of closing it. So it's great to be here with you all today. Prior to McKinsey and Yale, I spent a little bit of time focusing on child and family well-being at the Children's Hospital of Orange County.
Wonderful. So you can see we've got a great lineup for you here today. Investors, founders, incumbents, and consultants, which help influence all the others. And so we're going to just jump right in. And actually, Savannah, I want to start with you. If you could share a little bit about the recent report that McKinsey did. And for those of you who are in the business world, you know how critical it is to have McKinsey, Accenture, Deloitte, one of the top 5 pick up a cause, because whenever a new CEO comes into a business, which is usually every few years, new CEO and new board members, they bring in one of those top consultants to help them prioritize and evaluate the business. So McKinsey put out a very important report that was released at Davos. Can you share with us some of the highlights?
Yeah, so in January, we published a report in partnership with the World Economic Forum, and we really looked into what is the women's health gap, and like I said, what is the economic opportunity or business case of closing that gap. So what we really wanted to do with this report is look at what are a lot of the common misconceptions that exist around women's health and how can we address or demystify those. So when we talk about women's health, one of the first things that will often come up is people say women live longer than men, which is a fact, so they must be healthier. But what our research found is that despite living longer, women actually spend 25% more time in poor health than men. Another common thing that often comes alongside that is people thinking, well, that poor health must be concentrated at the end of life. Our research found, however, that women's health gap, or that poor health, is actually concentrated in women's prime working years, often between the ages of 20 and 60. So this has huge economic implications, as it's really impacting women's decisions that they're making around how they spend their time and their productivity in those working years. Another core piece of the research that I think is important to touch on is the definition of women's health. Women's health is far more than sexual and reproductive health. We found that global women's health burden is actually just 5% female-specific conditions. The majority is driven by conditions that affect both men and women, and like Jess, you said, women can affected differently or disproportionately than men. So we did a lot of work to really say, like, what is this women's health gap? What are all the different pieces to it? The next question we kind of set out to answer within that is, okay, what would be the opportunity if we close the gap? Both the health impact and the economic impact, as we really see those two going hand in hand. So in terms of the health impact, we found that if we were to close that gap, we could give each woman 7 additional days of healthy life each year. And collectively, that amounts to over an additional $1 trillion in economic impact each year by 2040. And for the US, that would be a little under $300 billion each year. So the health and economic side are really quite staggering in terms of the impact we can have. The last piece I'll briefly touch on with this report would be the drivers, because I think understanding the underlying reasons of the gap is really important for what we can go do about it and how we can close it and capture that opportunity and improve health. We identified kind of 4 key things that are driving this women's health gap. The first would be limited understanding of sex-based differences. So you'll see a few of us up here have a pin that says women are not small men. That came out along with our report and is a phrase we like to say. And within that, the study of human biology has really defaulted to the male body. So we really lack that fundamental understanding of sex-based differences. The second driver I would talk about would be limited access to sex-appropriate care. So what are the biases in care delivery and the barriers that women face every day as they look to receive care and treatment? The third would be data gaps. There is a huge gap in how we measure, recognize, and then prioritize this problem because of those data gaps. And then the final one would be limited investment relative to prevalence, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, and that limited investment piece has been the area of focus for many of us. So at the beginning of this month, on May 1st, we hosted a big event at the New York Stock Exchange. $5 trillion of investment was represented by investors there from big foundations like Novo Foundation and Gates. Where's Johanna Grossman? Johanna, wave. Dr. Johanna Grossman is also a Yale graduate, and she is the head of life sciences at the New York Stock Exchange. So she graciously has this event with us. Yeah, she's amazing. If you're thinking about taking your company public, do not run over to NASDAQ. You want to run over to the New York Stock Exchange and talk to Joanna. Truly, it's very cool stuff that they do for their companies. But we brought together $5 trillion of investment capital from foundations, governments, VCs, and corporate VCs. And these are often the investors, as Heather said, she didn't go right to traditional institutional investors to start her company. When women's health, you often get a very different mix of investors, but they all need to be coordinated and know each other if we're going to get out of this rut where we are now, where all the women's health dedicated funds are micro funds. A micro fund is something under 50 million. And when you look at the scope of the opportunity that Savannah just explained, there should not be just micro funds in this space. So it's a huge opportunity. So Sajni, I'm going to go to you. British Patient Capital is a huge investment vehicle. It does represent the taxpayer dollars of a country. How are you all thinking? How are you thinking about women's health and the opportunity?
Yeah. So because we are taxpayer backed, we're very fortunate that we can often go into emerging areas of science first. But the really important thing to note here is that we don't go into a new area unless there is a commercial return to be made. And so we will often invest in women's health, but we are not doing that purely because of the impact that that's making. We're actually doing it because there's a commercial return in this industry. So to give an example, we invested in a fund about 3 years ago. And through that fund, they invested in a company which delivers essentially health and wellness solutions in the workplace for employees. It's a company called Fativa, and it's headed up actually by a lady from the US, but she distributes these solutions into the European workplace landscape. And they've signed contracts with Bain Capital. They've signed contracts, I think, last week with Virgin, with Meta. So there's huge commercial traction within these businesses, which really kind of incentivizes us to go into these industries. But I guess the real reason why we do things like this is, one, to make money back for our shareholder, which is the UK government. But because we can go first, that allows other funds to come in and follow us. And they feel comfortable doing that because we have a very vigorous due diligence process as the UK government, because we're putting UK taxpayer money to work. And we have done all the work, we've done all the research and the due diligence. And this is an industry that makes a lot of money, and these are huge markets. These are, drugs that are targeting menopause, which impacts over half of the global population. These are drugs or therapies or diagnostics that are targeting PCOS. 1 in 5 women has PCOS. That's a huge, huge market. So frankly, we would be stupid not to invest into these industries. But we do a lot of work and a lot of due diligence to make sure we're investing in the right companies. And then that allows other funds, other investors to follow us. And that creates a momentum especially in Europe at the moment, but across the kind of women's health ecosystem.
Thank you. So going from the public investors to the private investors, Erin, over to you. Your career from JPM to Blackstone to L. you've worked with some of the best known names in the industry. How have you seen the attitudes towards women's health and women's health investing change? And then maybe a second is, how are you seeing private investors respond to the public funding initiatives, either from the UK government or the recent announcements from the US government?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I laugh a little bit when I hear it, because really the biggest change that's happened is that women's health has gone from not being talked about whatsoever, really, to being talked about. So the pause for that, right? That's amazing. We still have a long way to go. And I think, it's pretty, what is remarkable is you look back 10 years ago and there were no venture funds, no institutional funds dedicated solely to women's health. And I would say there probably weren't any major strategies or mandates within broader investment firms to go after women's health. And while a lot of the funds that are dedicated to women's health today are micro funds, to your point, they are still funds. They are out there. There are LPs who are willing to give them money. And there are large firms like L. that have strategies that are dedicated to pursuing these mandates. And so I think that's a really positive change overall. I think there's two kind of the two broad ways I'd characterize the changes we've seen. One is just the fact that investors are finally willing to recognize that women's health is not a niche market. It's a huge market opportunity. I don't need to repeat all the stats, but we're 50% of the population. We control 80% of household healthcare spending decisions, and we produce 100% of the population. So there's absolutely
It's true.
nothing niche about that women's health. And you've started to see investors put money where their mouth is. So there's been about a 315% increase in venture dollars towards women's health companies from 2018 to 2023, as compared to a 28% increase in broader healthcare general venture dollars. And obviously that's from one report, so don't come at me if you run the math and it's slightly different, but I would say that's a big enough gap to really confidently say there's been a big acceleration in investing in women's health that has outpaced the growth in healthcare. Now, it's important to put that into context, though, and remember that, of the $41 billion that Deloitte says was invested into venture dollars that were invested into some kind of healthcare business, whether med tech, pharma, devices, services, last year, 2% of that went to women's health. So, that 315% increase is really a law of small numbers dynamic we're talking about here. But super exciting nonetheless, and does go to show you that investors are really starting to get behind this. And then the second dynamic, I would say, touches back to the point that a couple of you have made around how women's health is not just about reproductive health, not just about sexual health. And finally, it does seem like investors are starting to realize they can invest in other conditions beyond just fertility and pregnancy, and positively impact women's lives. But we still have I would say that's a much more nascent trend. They're all nascent trends, but that's even more nascent. I think the stat was somewhere between 40% of venture dollars went to either pregnancy or fertility startups between 2019 and 2023 versus things like endometriosis or menopause or pelvic floor therapy, which are, for the most part, by the way, still very specific to the female biology, which excludes things like Alzheimer's and autoimmune diseases like we've talked about. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, is my takeaway, but we're moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm not sure if the research is also being done here at Yale, but I recently was at a presentation. I think, Beth, you were with me at the WHAM event in DC, and Walhalla Institute was presenting. They have a Center for Sex Differences in Autoimmune Disease. And they have actually been studying the sort of double expression of the genes in the immune system in women because of the double X chromosome activation. And the interesting point was that what they are learning from the overexpression in women is actually probably going to benefit men first. Men with autoimmune conditions. And so we often think of women's health as just benefiting women. What we learn from women is also, of course, going to benefit men because we do have that contrast that we can learn from so that every individual benefits. So Beth, I want to go to you next. You are one of the beacons in the women's health industry, and are such a thought leader in this space. How, the topic of the evolving landscape of women's health funding, I think you're probably in a really good position to tell us what has been the evolution that you have seen, but then where's it headed? Yeah. Where does this evolution continue to?
Yeah, so thanks for that. And so many amazing comments so far and, things that I think about all the time as well. So yes, from my vantage point, I think I can add something to some of the stuff that's already been said. First of all, I will say, as I've said, during the introduction, that it is absolutely, I think, as you've said, a completely different landscape right now, right? 5-10 years ago, no one was talking about women's health, reproduction, sure, maybe, and so on, but not the bigger things, right? And not the more broad aspects of women's health, which covers pretty much everything, right? So, the other piece that I've heard, but I will say again, is that what I'm seeing so far, at least from the investor side of things, but also in industry, is the fact that women's health is not a niche market. I finally feel like that's being understood, right? And I would say 5 years ago even, that was not the belief, right? I was like, well, I can't make any money in this, right? So, and what you saw is over the last several years, several of the big pharma companies actually have kind of left, right, women's health. Certainly as it relates to early development, right? There's been, a lot of announcements around, Bayer, even Ferring, saying, we're not going to do the early stuff. We will, sort of pivot to kind of an external innovation, model, which is okay because actually I think that's great opportunity for sort of smaller companies and who will then be able to hopefully exit right through to the larger companies. But that's definitely a trend. What I feel, just to your question of what's going to happen next, is whether we will see those larger companies coming back. So who knows about that? So let me mention a couple of things as well. So, we talked about and we've heard about the economic impact, which is enormous, as you can tell, right? And WHAM talks about this as well, right? Even in the WHAM, if you haven't heard about WHAM, this is the Women's Health Access Matters. It's a nonprofit. They've done some incredible work with the RAND Corporation on, the economic impacts of women's health. And in the U.S., what they found is even a very small investment by the NIH potentially of about $350 million, which is a teeny amount of money, would bring potentially $14 billion, right, to the economy just in the U.S. alone. So big numbers, and then even bigger when you look globally, as McKinsey has done. So that is all true, I believe. The challenge for me when it comes to investment, though, is, if you're sitting with an investor, the fact that the economy is impacted may not necessarily resonate when it comes to, well, that's great, but what do I get out of it? What's my ROI, first of all, right? Mm-hmm. And then how long is it going to take, right, for me to get that exit? And there's no question that, the various pieces of women's health, when you think about, what companies are doing, for sure, femtech is leading the way. And I think the reason for that is, to some extent, you can address certain things without necessarily being really, really deep into the underlying science, right? And you can develop an app, over a reasonably short period of time and with sort of maybe a much less, amount of money funding that's needed versus diagnostics, as an example, that take a long time, and then therapeutics, which is my space, which takes a really long time, right? So I think, what I'm seeing at least is femtech leading, digital leading for sure, but we're still lagging behind when it comes to diagnostics and in particular therapeutics. So when it comes to therapeutics, we don't understand, I forget who was saying this, but, the science. We've just got such a long way to go to understand all of the conditions that impact women only. And then also we clearly need to understand the sex differences as well. So there's so much science to be done. Now, I'm optimistic because we are seeing that there's more investment, and certainly the announcements from the White House around and the executive order by Joe Biden, sort of really pushing Congress to invest $12 billion, right, among all the various pieces of the government. So NIH in particular, we hope, what I think is going to happen, and I believe they've committed to this, is that there are going to be women's health centers of excellence all around the country. So that's exciting because that means then there's going to be more science, right, which will ultimately help us to understand what the mechanisms of disease are, what, the underlying sort of foundation of various diseases are, what are the genetics, what's going on there, what are the mutations that are happening, and various things. We just have so much to learn. So I'm super excited though, because I believe that with the science will come more investment, more innovation, right? So, but I give that a few years still, right, to really see the investment on the therapeutic side increase. Let me just see. I'm an old lady, so I have notes here. Just want to make sure. Payers, I think, is a big thing too, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of work to do there, and we also just, I think I've already mentioned for the most part, but there really are few dedicated companies, right, in women's health now. So we definitely need some successes badly, right? We've had a couple of really interesting products that have come to market recently. Veoza. We've got the Sages product, which is super exciting. Veoza, unfortunately, and this is a product for hot flashes, for menopause, has missed its targets, right? So again, you've got investors going, well, see, or So we need some big successes as well, as I think, to turn this around in the end.
Yeah. Some of that is also why I was so keen to have a big top consultancy here, because when I talk to pharma groups, I'll often ask them, okay, raise your hand if you work in women's health. And, just Ferring and Organon raise their hands. And they're like, all right, raise your hands if you work in autoimmune, if you work in the brain, if you work in musculoskeletal. And you just go down and down the list. And pretty soon, everybody in the pharma audience has their hand up. And you're like, guys, most of your customers are women, and most of these diseases impact women differently and disproportionately. And fun fact that was in Nature magazine did a special edition on women's health this month for May. I encourage you to check it out. But in it, they really go into how 8 of the last drug withdrawals in recent years were because of side effects in women that weren't seen in clinical trials, because the trials weren't powered to see side effects in women. There were so few women in the study. So if it's leading to billion-dollar drugs being withdrawn from the market, that's a big incentive to change how we're looking at women in studies, because they do manifest diseases differently and respond differently. So I wanted to say I'm not going to say the best for last because I love this entire panel, but we get to talk macro level and system level. You're living this as the entrepreneur, creating the new diagnostic, talking to the investors, hiring the talent, selling the tool, building the contracts. You're living it day in and day out. As a founder in women's health, how are you experiencing the evolution of this space?
Well, thank you. I think Beth covered so much of it. I think the space has evolved almost entirely since I got started. So it's funny to look back on the list of pharma companies that were active when I started and who's active today. Ferring wrote us a letter of recommendation that supported our seed financing way back when, and the landscape looks completely different now. Organon didn't even exist back then. But I think something that stands out to me that has not been mentioned is the role that the NIH has to play and how that looked, when I got started and where we're looking to go with that. So I was just there last week giving a talk on how the biorepositories to do early work in women's health for products that can become large commercial opportunities simply don't exist. So a material part of my journey in building Dot Lab has been to create the biorepository from scratch, because there are so many stakeholders to get a novel product to market. There are the payers who Beth mentioned. There are regulatory stakeholders. There are just the material lack of understanding about the biology in the area where we work, endometriosis, has meant that we have spent 7 years collecting blood samples at the time of laparoscopy, which is the standard of care for diagnosing the disease. And we have done so by engaging key opinion leaders in the space along the way, FDA, payers, not to mention, what you were highlighting, Jessica, about the operational aspects of running our day-to-day business activities. Because of the reality that you already articulated around the women's health venture capitalists mostly being micro funds, there simply was not enough capital in the market when we got started, and there still really isn't today, to fund that research and development focused work. And it is only now that I would view our company as a candidate for venture capital as a financial instrument. But what that means is that everything takes, and when I say everything, I mean mostly the science, because of all the stakeholders involved, each step of the process is just, is so long that we're still looking ahead at doing a clinical utility study to demonstrate the use of our product in the hands of non-specialists before we're even eligible for our own reimbursement code, for example. I do think that unfortunately, the dollars, NIH is the main funder of biomedical research, as we all know. The dollars going into women's health are not really moving in the right direction, unfortunately, since I got started. I would say that, give or take 2% of the budget goes into women's health. And if you take out oncology, we're talking about a fraction of a percent. And that means that the data gaps that we all talk so much about will continue to face this garbage in, garbage out problem when it comes to, machine learning or looking for new targets, until the NIH can really help fund the PIs who can then come up with novel opportunities for the tech transfer office to then spin out into companies for venture capitalists to then invest in. Mm-hmm. And so we need to look, way downstream before I think we'll see much change for the entrepreneur's journey. I do think that, as others have already said, one of the biggest changes has just been recognition of women's health as a category. But I think it's the entrepreneur's journey is completely different still across medtech, therapeutics, and services. And just to add to what Beth mentioned on the therapeutic side, one of the things that I'm still so struck by is that, for example, if we were to design a clinical trial in endometriosis today, the endpoints for an endometriosis trial are not presence of disease or lack thereof. It's pelvic pain. It's a really poor proxy for the disease. And this is where, that's what I mean by garbage in, garbage out. Until we really dig into the biology, we're still barely scratching the surface of not only the scientific opportunity, but the commercial opportunity as well.
And that's one of the reasons I was so excited. Where's Morag? Morag, raise your hand. And Josh, is Josh in here? The Yale Ventures team put together a Yale Health of Women Summit this year. It was the first year they did it, and they brought researchers from across the different schools. So medicine, public health, engineering, and they brought together researchers from different areas across the school that were working in areas that were disproportionately impacting women as just true science coming together to say, you may not realize these researchers are all in the women's health field, but they are. And this is a way for them to meet each other and for investors to meet them. The basic science piece is still so lacking in this field, which is really frustrating in 2024. So that's a question I'm going to ask next is to all of you on the panel. What do you think? I'll ask you each to name one thing that you think would have an outsized impact on improving funding. Like, what is something that would make a big difference in improving funding in women's health? Who wants to start? Go ahead.
This is actually piggybacking off of what Heather and Beth just talked about, and I think is largely the elephant in the room, except for here because it's been brought up. I think venture funding and growth and private equity funding is very well suited for certain pieces of the puzzle, but not for the whole puzzle. And I think that people on the venture side, people across the board don't actually recognize that yet. There are incentives within the venture capital private equity structure that are misaligned with things and the timelines of diagnostics and therapeutics and things like that. There are areas right now, like in certain services or in products, for example, where venture dollars can go a long way in helping get solutions that are perhaps a bit less clinical out into the market, help fill the gap in the meantime of issues that women have, symptoms that they have. And also just broadly speaking, spread awareness, but venture is absolutely not going to be the be all end all here. I think that's being able to invest in women's health and wellness is both very empowering for me, but also frustrating in a lot of ways because there are so many things that we can't touch given the sort of institutions we sit in. But empowering nonetheless, because better to put dollars into the space than not any at all. But I think to answer your question specifically, the biggest thing that I think would be having a very frank public discussion about what types of funding are best suited for each of these different sort of verticals and use cases, and putting that out there and drawing a broad community sort of conversation around it and making it very clear who you should be going to as an entrepreneur or a researcher for funding versus having people sort of spread themselves too thin across a bunch of different sources that perhaps may not be the right fit.
Yeah. Sajni?
I think exits. We need more exits. So I think
more exits. Yeah. More unicorns.
Exits. More unicorns, more exits. We need more pharma companies acquiring these companies. I was talking to you, Jess, earlier today about Bayer. So Bayer did the acquisition of Candy Therapeutics. It was a UK-based company that had a non-hormonal solution for menopause. $1 billion acquisition. So they understand that menopause is a huge market, especially when the non-hormonal, sorry. And then I think Bayer did another partnership. We were talking about this earlier with Evotech, biotechnology company, to try and get PCOS companies through their portfolio into the market. Bayer is one of them, but the other pharma companies need to collaborate too. They need to understand, the huge market opportunities here. And I think the more exits we have, the more investment that we're going to encourage into the sector, the more, diverse investment teams will begin to understand that this is actually something that can make money because it can. They'll understand that there's an opportunity here to get funds to be returned. And that's where I really think that's just going to create a huge momentum in this sector. It's going to attract all different types of investors, early stage, late stage, and even, generalist funds will start to look at women's health because they'll start to see that there are returns coming to the sector. So I think I really want pharma partners to engage in this sector. I want them to start looking at this market more seriously, and I want them to realize that they can make a lot of money from it as well.
I can go perhaps. Oh,
go ahead. Go first.
So fully agree. I put down three things, but we've already talked about two of them, so I can kind of cheat. So advancement in the science, we've already talked about that, and then needing some successes, huge. Yep. So I will talk about one other thing that I think we haven't quite touched on today, which is the need for the entire women's health ecosystem to come together, right? So a great example of this that I am fascinated by, but that has changed the landscape completely, is in the field of oncology, right? So in the last decade, we've gone from, treating most cancers with, random chemotherapies and, throw in a little bit of radiation. And if one chemo doesn't work, let's try another, but not really based on any science in particular, right? And we have now reached a point where many aspects of oncology we have true solutions, right? We understand the mechanism. We have targeted therapies. We know what the mutation is, and we attack that mutation. So this is targeted therapy. It's precision medicine at its best. And I believe the reason that has happened is that truly the entire ecosystem of cancer came together. So, for example, Dr. Pazdur at the FDA put together about, I'm not sure exactly when this started, but the FDA Center of Excellence for Oncology. And he brought together literally everybody, right? So the FDA, the NIH, CDC, academics, industry, brought everyone together and said, all right, what are we going to do? And there was a plan made and really focused on the academics and the science that was going on that maybe we weren't aware of. So and then as I think about that and, sort of thinking about that, a similar model for women's health, one of the key issues I believe is that I think there's quite a bit of research going on in academic centers. I actually do. And even on women specific conditions, not as much, I don't think, on sex differences yet. Hopefully that will come. But the women's health space, for some reason in academics, honestly, and I was at Brigham Women's and Mass General last week and still heard this kind of like, we don't trust industry, they're bad people, and they just want our money. And it's sort of like, but wait, every drug that every device that you use every single day, where did that come from? So it's such a disconnect that exists. But what it means is that, folks who are in the labs, they're, sort of doing their work on whatever it might be, endometriosis, just sort of focus on that. And the trajectory for someone in that space is they're thinking more about how do I publish? How do I, get promoted? And not so much about, well, gee, this is an interesting mechanism here. How can I translate that into a drug potentially? It's amazing, but literally they're not thinking about that. And so we desperately need education, in the academics, centers. And I talked about this last week with a venture capitalist actually, who also recognized that and has begun to bring people from the academic centers that are doing work and sort of educate them on all the aspects of, spinning out potentially a company, right? And IP, women's health researchers have no idea about, any of that stuff, right? Or just how to get going. So for me, I think one thing that would be hugely impactful would be education of academics and then also bringing the entire ecosystem together.
This is where I get to put in such a nice plug for the amazing Yale Ventures team and the Blavatnik Fund's work, because they're working so closely with researchers here at Yale to do exactly that. It's really nice to see. Yeah. Savannah?
Yes, I was agreeing on ecosystem approach fully. I think for me, a little bit of what everyone said, but we're stuck in this reinforcing cycle a little bit where we lack the scientific understanding of women's bodies and we have limited data to then de-risk investment. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, and we need those companies, private sector, public sector, social sector to all think, how can they reallocate existing resources? And then how can they deepen that understanding of women's health in particular?
Heather?
I think, I have two ideas. One is that there is a congressional waiver for FNIH to actually accept private funds, and I would love to see a major donor step up and make a splash in women's health. I do not think that we will see the NIH budget itself grow. I don't think we need to take away from other disease areas or take up more of the pie necessarily, but we need to grow the budget. And I think FNIH dollars allocated there would be a creative way to get more money into the space. I think what Beth highlighted is just something that I experience every day, or I really echo those comments. I think technology transfer in other areas of medicine especially to go back to your oncology example, where the opportunity to make money has been proven, with oncology being the prime example. The technology transfer process is smooth and not particular to any one institution, but looking at the U.S. holistically. If we could mimic that story of success for women's health, where there are so many disease areas that really need the research and the all the development steps along the way to get a novel product to market, when we start seeing those success stories and we create the new lanes for women's health to really accelerate, that's when I think we'll start to see the needle move in all the areas that this panel has highlighted.
Yeah. I think, so I actually started my pharma career in regulatory, which is a really cool place to start pharma if you're going to go to the dark side, which I highly recommend. And the regulatory agencies actually are the reason women weren't included in research till 1993. They weren't required to be included in federally funded research till 1993. And then it took a while to get to non-federally funded research. I think regulatory agencies have a big role to play here in accelerating progress to make up for the gap from women not being included. And if regulators change their policies, pharma companies comply. So I would like to see more action from regulators around the world. All right. So I have 2 quick questions and we have 8 minutes remaining. And you all know after I lived in Germany for 10 years, I'm a stickler for ending on time. So 1-minute answers, please. First, the question for each of you is, what area of women's health are you most excited about investing in? And Heather, kick us off.
Oh gosh, I would say autoimmune. I think that we're so stuck on labeling things in women's health and the nomenclature, but I think there's enormous opportunity across autoimmune, and I would actually put endometriosis in that category.
Wonderful. Sajni?
I think Beth touched on it for me as therapeutics. And I think we know a company called Freya. Super exciting. They're looking at the vaginal biome. The vaginal biome actually might be able to tap into the IVF market, which is worth $25 billion. They are looking at how you can basically, if you correct the vaginal biome and make it healthy, you can actually help fertility within women. This impacts men and women, children, everyone, families. So this is a huge, huge market. And research, like you're saying, like scientific research into these sectors, it's amazing. And this could be an incredible company. So I love that sector and I love therapeutics. And I think I also have PCOS. So I would love to see some type of therapeutic come out for PCOS, so I'm not having to manage my condition through lifestyle changes. And frankly, I have no idea how to manage this condition, but I'm just doing it. So I want to see more therapies, because there's a lot of people like me that have no idea how to actually, basically look after myself in the right way and help myself get through PCOS. So therapeutics.
Great. Thank you. Beth?
That's a difficult question because there's so many things to be excited about. But okay, I think
just pick one.
Preeclampsia. So this is a condition that affects women only. It's a pregnancy it's a condition of pregnancy where women develop high blood pressure and other complications, and there are many, many deaths from this around the world every year. There is a company called Comanche, I think Biosciences or something, that is working on potentially a preeclampsia therapeutic, so it's super exciting. They're looking at a very specific marker that seems to be elevated in women with preeclampsia that can be diagnosed potentially really early to prevent some of the deaths that occur. So I'm keeping my eye on that, and it's, for me, if that is successful, I'm just going to jump for joy.
Amazing.
As a human and a female, there are a ton of areas that I'm personally super excited about, but I think with my venture sort of growth equity hat on, we're particularly excited right now about menopause, which is probably not a shock to anyone here. But I think venture is pretty well suited to actually help accelerate this space, because there are a lot of ways that businesses can put out products that help alleviate symptoms, for example, or put out lifestyle solutions and services that help women in the menopausal stage of life. work out in ways that are more appropriate to their changing bodies and do other things that are helpful for hormone management and things like that. And so I think Venture is very well suited to do that. And I also think that it has been a proliferation of menopause related businesses, which is amazing. And we invested in a menopause products business. But I think there's also a huge opportunity, even at this earliest stage, for consolidation, to create, larger scaled players and sort of bring all of these really brilliant minds under one roof. So that's where I've been spending a lot of time.
Thank you. Savannah?
Yes. And I would say I'll go back to our research. When we quantified that $1 trillion economic opportunity, we found that 10 conditions alone make up over half of that. So I would be excited to have us focus on those 10 conditions, things like asthma, migraines, depressive disorders, PMS, other gynecological conditions, because we know those conditions have an outsized health and economic impact.
Awesome. And is David Stittleman in here? So there's a poster out here in the foyer, in the open space, about a women's health innovation here at Yale. And right now, to fix neural tube defect, there's often a surgery in utero. The woman is cut open, and the infant has their neural tube closed up. He has an innovation here coming out of Yale, which would eliminate the need for surgery. And if you think that there is an alternative to cutting a pregnant woman open and doing a surgery on a developing human that can be done without any surgery, it's barbaric to think that we're still sticking with the old model. So I'm really excited about some of the innovations happening here at Yale in women's health. So last question, and I think everybody in the audience should also think about answering this. What are you personally doing in the next year to advance women's health funding? And you can answer it for yourself, but also for everyone in the audience. What is it that everyone else can do to advance women's health funding? And I'm just going to say vote. I know Chelsea said it yesterday, but I'm going to say it again. Vote, and if you can, run for office. Heather.
Oh, that's such a good one. I think I would love to see ARPA-H specifically find program managers with expertise in women's health. It is a fantastic opportunity to move women's health forward, and finding and retaining that talent at the government level is always such a challenge, but there's real opportunity there.
Applications are open now. If you have the expertise, please apply. They're paying competitive rates for the market, and they need people to help distribute government funds. Sajni.
So through my role at BPC, something that I try and do is we invest in funds. And every time I talk to a life sciences fund, I'm saying, are you investing in companies that include women in their clinical trials? Another thing I like to do is I look at the investment team. And I think this is really important because they can invest in technologies, but if they have a female within the investment team, that female might understand if that technology can actually be adopted. So is it more comfortable, like you said, Jess, than some of the current solutions on the market? Is it a process that's less invasive? And I think female investors are kind of best placed in this scenario to understand the adoption. But again, diversity. I don't want to just have female investors. I want to have a diverse group of investors investing in women's health, because everyone understands women. And I think personally, I'm an angel investor. So if anyone here has anything interesting they'd like to share with me, I'm more than welcome to please approach me at any point during the summit, because I love to invest in women's health. I know it makes a lot of money, and it's an exciting industry to operate in.
Thank you.
That's great. I will continue to advocate, and I would recommend that all of you do that as well. And then one thing that we haven't talked about, and I'll be super fast, I promise, is the need for more women in decision-making positions, right, across this whole entire ecosystem. So, we tend to celebrate that, oh yeah, women are in the C-suite, it's great. But if you actually look at who is making that top decision, investment firms, academic centers, name it, we're still really quite a small percentage of those top decisions. And, when you have women, just like you said, who understand what's going on and can make that final decision to invest, I think that will change the landscape.
Yeah, for those who don't know, we've only had one woman head of a top pharma company, Emma, over at GSK. That's the only female CEO of a top pharma or biotech company.
She gets stick for what she does.
Yeah. So we need many more. What do you recommend?
I would say, personally, and for everyone here, I would say be in more rooms like this, attend more conferences and summits and gatherings like this, get people in the room from a variety of different disciplines and a variety of different careers, to talk about this and then be really loud about taking those messages from whatever room you're in outside and projecting it. And just going to do a quick plug for the summit that you and Joanna planned earlier this month. That was so energizing and inspiring. And my personal goal is to be a part of more things like that.
You're always welcome. Savannah.
Definitely. I would just end on echoing everyone and continuing to raise awareness. And personally, I'm excited to continue articulating the business case. There's a role everyone can play in this. And I think just continuing to ask the question of what is the impact on women's health in the research you're doing, investments you're making, care you deliver, will really help us drive the change we need.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us for this rich discussion today. Please join me in thanking our panelists.